Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben and with me is
Jim.
And welcome
just like last week, just like the week before. It's like time is repeating itself and Jim is always here.
Well, it's because we do a podcast where we watch movies and inflict them upon each other. And I'd just like to say, okay, campers, rise and shine and don't forget your booties because it's cold out there today. And that's because we watched the movie Groundhog Day. For those of you not watching the video, I'm dancing.
So Groundhog Day is, I'm pretty sure it's your favorite movie, isn't it, Ben? Like, this is the one.
I say I have like a top three, and that top three kind of rotates. The only consistent movie in that top three is Groundhog Day. So yeah, it's probably my favorite movie. I recognize there are better movies, both in everything this movie does and more, but this is my favorite.
It's just such a careful way to phrase it. You like went a very roundabout way to be like, yeah, it's pretty much my favorite movie.
And I think it's because I think you have to be responsible with your favorites, right? And I think you have to be responsibly honest with, as you grow, even from day to day, what you want is different. This seems to consistently sit in what I want. And that's how I put it. I call it my rainy day movie. It's a movie I can put on when I've got nothing to do and just enjoy it, whether it's in the background or my prime focus.
Well, fair enough. Look, because it is, let's just say it. Let's just say for now, for this moment in time, movie. And for the, for really since I've known you, since
the last 37 years.
Yes, since you were 12 years old, this is your favorite movie. So this is going to be a very Ben-heavy cast, I think, and that is okay, you know. So you are in charge of both the movie summary and the movie stats. So I'm just going to sit back and, let the magic happen. So enjoy giving us that summary and giving us some statistics, Benjamin.
So I don't know if listeners or watchers of this have never noticed. I've never written down the plot to any of the movies I describe.
I've noticed.
I just do them off the dome. I respect this so much that I wrote my plot synopsis. So here we go. In the quaint town of Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, the film Groundhog Day explores the existential philosophy through the story of Phil Connors, a jaded meteorologist assigned to cover the annual Groundhog Day festivities. Connor finds himself trapped in a time loop, reliving February 2nd over and over. The predicament forces him into a journey of self-examination, moral growth, and a deepening love story. Initially, Connors indulges in hedonism and malice, exploiting the lack of consequences in his time loop. However, this monotony leads to a shift in his mindset as he begins to seek fulfillment through acts of kindness, artistic pursuits, and genuine connections. He also starts to fall in love with the lovely Rita, his producer. His feelings for her motivates him to become a better person, striving for self-improvement. The film concludes with Connor's ethical growth and sincere love for Rita breaking the time loop, symbolizing his spiritual and intellectual awakening. Groundhog Day serves as a profound meditation on time, morality, and love, and a quest for meaning, wrapping up in a seemingly simple comedic narrative.
Well done. Well done. I heartily approve, and I feel like your commitment to preparation has paid off.
Thank you. Released in 1993, directed by Harold Ramis, Caddyshack, National Lampoon's Vacation, Groundhog Day. He also directed 4 episodes of The American Office. He also wrote tons of stuff like Ghostbusters. Screenplay was also by Danny Rubin and Harold Ramis. Danny Rubin wrote the original story and the original script. He also did the 2016 musical. So it's kind of like his story that then Ramis kind of rewrote with him and directed. Starring Bill Murray, Andy McDowell, and Chris Elliott, maybe the shortest cast list I've ever spoken through. Budget of $35 million. Oh, hang on, no, sorry, I forgot to replace that. No budget this week. That's the last podcast budget. Anyway,
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that's exactly the same amount as I do.
I got it. Budget 14 to 30 million. Back then, budgets were hard to ascertain. Box office of 105 million. This movie was very popular when it came out, and it has remained very popular. So we've clearly documented my love for this film, and I'll go into why I think that is. And I think my reasons have changed slightly since the last time I thought about this. But Jim, What did you think of watching Groundhog Day?
Yeah, it's funny. I was much as I sort of joked about it on the end of the last cast, I was really quite looking forward to rewatching Groundhog Day. It's a film that I've only seen once before, and it was even then. I think it was at your urging, that I should
I held you
definitely watch
hostage.
it. Um, so look, I had watched it then, and I remember my thoughts on it pretty clearly, and watching it again now, and my thoughts are pretty much exactly the same, which is that I think the strongest element, look, this movie, let's just say it's a classic, and we've looked at a few of these on this podcast. We looked at The Great Escape, and they kind of become almost that they are timeless, they're eternal. There are so many people out there in the world who just, you couldn't say a bad word about the film, do you know what I mean, because of its status. But at the same time, I watched it, and I, it's a movie like any other, and I do have certain things about it. I think the strongest part of this film, hands down, is the script. The screenplay is fantastic, and I think the writing, the construction, the swings between comedy and darkness, really, to me, I just think the screenplay is fantastic, and I know it was worked and reworked and continued to be worked on, and even there was some changes made, while they were filming, but just a really well crafted screenplay and story that I think does a fantastic job. I struggle with Bill Murray in this role. To be perfectly honest, I believe that he does, and particularly at this stage in his career as well. I think he does narcissistic, awful human being very well. However,
Let's say he was
I
method acting.
yeah, I don't actually believe the turn. And it's a difficult turn for any actor to actually accomplish. Like, you think it's a comedy, it's whatever, you just go from this to this, but because of how gradual it is and because of the structure of the film, it would be an incredibly difficult turn for any actor to convey and portray. And they were trying to do it with subtlety, but ultimately, I don't believe Bill Murray in the last third of the movie, where he does start to show those traits going from awful to more kind-hearted, so it's funny because he's the thing about the movie that people love the most, and he's the thing that for a lot of the movie works, but in my personal opinion, in that back section, it kind of falls apart, and for me it's due to what he was able to convey at that point in his career. Beyond that, he's had many additional years to hone his more dramatic craft, and I feel like this was sort of that transition point. So, but look,
I agree. I really do. And I think it's what people remember about this film is the first two-thirds. If you ask anyone to tell you their favorite bits or the memorable bits of these movies, it's not the last third of the movie where he's kind of perfected the loop. It's the trial and error, it's the comedic elements, it's him being the worst human he can be at the start. And it's those middle bits. It's not the ending. The ending is actually, you're right, the weakest part of this film, because I think the greatest strength in this film is there's never ever an explanation provided for why this is happening. But that creates a really hard ending to a movie because you just have to kind of walk out of it without an explanation. Like you go, oh, it's over. We're done. And yeah, that turn into that, I agree. And I've always thought of Murray as a person who acts from his real life, from within himself. He's not like a Daniel Day-Lewis who kind of inhabits a new character or a new role. And you're right, I don't think he'd really lived enough life up until this point to have the experience to be the nicer, learned, evolved man that he's supposed to be at the end of the movie. So yeah, I 100% agree with the acting there. Strangely enough, something I pick up in a few times in movies is that female roles aren't written particularly well. I actually think Rita's role in this movie is written really well. She's written with a kind of dignity and strength that her character has in this movie and holds to the entire time, in a way that I think Andie MacDowell delivers something that's quite a nice acting turn in this movie. And look, she's not an actor's actor. She has her roles, but I think she nails this one really well.
See, that's interesting because I hear what you're saying and I agree with some portions of those statements, and then other times I'm like, but is she also not just kind of the perfect character, in the sense that I don't feel like she's perhaps well-rounded enough. She's the object of his desire, and she sort of does no wrong through the course of the movie. So while there are moments of nuance to her, I'm not sure if I would say, to my mind, that she's as well-rounded. But look, you've seen this film. I've seen this film twice. You've seen this film a bajillion times. So what am I missing here, Ben?
I don't know if you're missing anything. Maybe it's just a different point of view in that this role in any other movie would be just super perfunctory. Like, it would just be there to cause its turn, the turn in Phil Connors. I feel like they did a little bit extra with it in this movie, which is probably why I'm giving it a bit more credit.
In that case, I would probably agree with that. I think that the way, Andie MacDowell plays the role, she's very charming. She definitely is quite winning. She, gets the audience on side. And it's not difficult to see why, Bill Murray's character falls in love with her over the course of the film. So, so I can certainly see that.
I'll burn an interesting fact. Originally, the end of this movie was different. As written. It wasn't filmed this way ever, but as written. So the original ending of the movie, very similar. Phil becomes a better man. He confesses his love to Rita the night before. They have that kind of thing. But Rita kind of still has doubts and still isn't kind of fully locked in. And the next day, Phil Connors wakes up with the time loop broken. And the movie ends with Rita being stuck in her own time loop to learn something. So there's kind of like a transition of roles at the end of the movie because there wasn't the proper connection that obviously the original version of this movie, the universe, wanted. So there was kind of this whole, like, she wasn't in the first few drafts probably as perfect based on the way that ending was originally written.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, I did hear that the original screenplay was substantially darker. I don't know a lot about that, but you can still see sort of vestiges of that in the finished cut. It's still surprising to me that they went through I guess what you'd call the suicide sequence, where the character is, basically trying to do away with himself day after day because he's so frustrated at being in the time loop, So, and then of course he steals the groundhog and crashes the car and, does away with himself that way. So there's some stuff that remains kind of surprising in a mainstream comedy. And I think maybe those darker elements are perhaps some of the reasons for its success, because it was certainly, it was packaged in a very commercial package, but there are bits and pieces here and there that are, pretty subversive and pretty sort of dark, really.
So, yeah, you're right. This movie was different originally. There was no real comedic elements in the original story written. The original script was one of those things where it was kind of a spec script kind of created to show how this guy could write, and he wrote this narrative. It came across Raimi's desk, and he's like, why are you showing me this? It's not a comedy. It's not something I would do. But he did like the idea, so they ended up kind of working with the original writer to write a more comedic thing. There was a lot of tension on the set between Bill Murray and Harold Ramis on the tone of this film. Ramis wanted a more comedic film, and Murray wanted a more philosophical film, something that actually dealt with the subject matter a lot more. And that actually caused on-the-day rewrites, it caused fights, it caused temper tantrums in such a big way that they actually stopped speaking after this film and didn't speak until 2014, just before Ramis's death. That's how much antagonism and animosity was between them at the end of this film. given everybody kind of says it was more on Murray's side than Ramis's side. But yeah, like there was this kind of thing of like the philosophy of this film and the darkness of this film. A lot of people joined the project originally because they liked those things, because they enjoyed those things. And to basically get it made, they needed the comedy.
Yeah, I think, and I don't mind the comedy. I think that the comedy, I do think the finished product works, particularly if you look at it on a screenplay level. Like I said before, I enjoy this movie. But what I still don't have a good read on, Ben, is why is it your favorite
All right,
movie?
here we go.
What is it about it that is like? Because I'm like, I get it. It's good. It's not the original time loop movie, but it is the most well-known time loop movie. Yeah, it's the time loop movie, right? So, but why do you love it?
Okay, originally I liked this movie because of the fantasy of it. I genuinely love, and still do love, the idea of being stuck in a day and perfecting it. I love it. And I realize as an adult, I would probably go through all the same things as Phil Connors. I would go insane, you would become super sane, you would go through all these gamuts of emotions and destruction and birth and all these sort of things. But I love it. I love the idea of being the master of a day. It's a power fantasy in a strange way. As time has gone by, I have liked it for another reason. And I like the philosophy of this film. I like what this film says about the human nature, the human condition. What it says optimistically is inside of us all, whether we realize it or not, we strive to be better. We strive to grow and change. And the character of Phil in this movie was kind of an exception. He refused to. He complained about everything and he stunted, and then the universe said, well, I'm going to force you onto the correct path of change. It's quite Buddhist, it's quite philosophical, rebirth, change, learning, new lives, extra lives, time loops, diversions. I like the thought experiment that this movie creates, and I like it so much because it refuses to answer why. It allows me to have these thoughts. It allows me to have these questions, and every time I watch the movie, my answers and my dives get longer and deeper. My tangents go further or in different directions because it's a movie that allows almost as much creativity thinking about it as went into creating it. This movie has flaws as a movie. You're right. I actually don't think Murray is the best casting for this movie. There was an actor originally approached for it that I think would have been absolutely brilliant, but he declined it because he didn't get it. And that was Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton would have crushed this movie.
He would have too. Like I could totally see. Oh, that actually makes me mad.
He would nail the charming switch. He would nail it so well.
But also, like, you could see his reach would be into the start of the film, but I could totally see him doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, and even at that stage in his career, like, he'd sort of, and the proof is he was just doing Batman and Batman Returns, and his Bruce Wayne does have a streak of arrogance through him, and sort of aloofness that I could totally see weaponized into and extrapolated out a little bit into, what Phil is like at the start of this movie. So yeah, that sucks that didn't come off,
But as I said, the reason I like this movie is because I like thinking about this movie. It's as simple as that. And it expands. I like almost all time loop movies I've ever watched. There's a movie called Death Day, which is about a girl. It's a horror movie. She gets murdered every day. Not a good movie, but I like it because I like the concept of the loop. Palm Springs, Andy Samberg, another more adult version of this movie. Again, I like it because I like the time loop. I like being able to kind of explore that myself. I like theories that this movie creates. This movie is kind of a world upon its own online. Like, for example, like there are online debates about how many loops he went through.
Hmm.
So how many loops have you read anything? Do you know how many loops he went through or think you know?
Oh,
There is
I've
no real
heard.
answer.
No, I've not recently, but I think perhaps the first time I watched the movie, I did do a little bit of digging, and the number was much higher than I thought it was. Like, you know, when people sort of analyze it and go through it, like I believe the number is very, very high. So it's in the thousands or something, isn't it? So of days,
So
but
the original concept by Rubin, the guy who wrote it, he said just a flat, it's 10,000 years. And that was almost within the script itself. That was removed to avoid audience confusion. Because again, they didn't try to answer anything. They just showed the existence within the problem. Um, Ramis in DVD commentaries and a few other places a few years afterwards said it was about 10 years. That was his headcanon. But the internet does what the internet does, and there's a few theories, anywhere ranging from about 8 years to 50 years. The most common answer I found online is between 30 to 40 years, closer to the 30 range. And the way they come up with that number is pretty simple. The three main skills he learns in the movie is ice sculpting, piano, and French, like speaking it fluently. So allowing for time to perfect those to masterclass level, you got about 10 years for the art, 10 years, 10 and a half years for the piano, and anywhere, depending on how much daily effort you put into it, between 1 and 10 years to speak fluent French. Add into the human nature of it and the things that we see, the things he wastes time on, the days he decides to end early for whatever reason, the days he gets distracted with being a horrible human and doing other things, and the days where he just is depressed and sleeps in and watches Jeopardy a million times. So kind of factoring all that in, the kind of accepted is anywhere between 30 and 40 years, depending on how much he procrastinates. Also add in that some people actually think he has a superpower. And that superpower is memorization.
Right.
Because the average human being, even looping that many times, you don't remember stuff identically as him, or most human beings don't. But the amount of times he put into memorizing facts about people, physical events like robbing the truck and catching the child out of the tree and timing them down so perfectly. Yeah, so my guess is about 35 years, so in that 30 to 40 year range.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. Like, I'm even thinking like maybe it's closer to 50 because he's got to. There's a scene in the cafe where he knows every single person's backstory, where they're from. So he spent a lot of time with all those people,
Multiple days
like,
with
you know,
each, yeah.
in multiple days with each, and then enough to remember it as well. So, like, you know, it's but look, it's I like that they don't explain the time loop. I think that's actually crucial to the success of the film, and it's one of the great, you know, things that confident filmmakers will do, where they are just, you know, basically confident in their narrative, and in that they're telling, and it doesn't need the explanation, you know. So so I think that they do that very well, because if this was in a different genre, then it would probably need an explanation. But because we are functionally in a romantic comedy for this movie, you know, like that's its sort of core genre. That's the thing we return to. That's what we're based on structurally, you know, because that's the key business of the movie. We really don't need an explanation for the time loop, you know, and I think committing to that was a really smart idea. And I'm sure there would have been pressure to actually explain it. Like that would have been.
Can you imagine a movie executive going, I don't get it.
Mm.
You gotta give the answer. Well, I want an answer. Tell me, what is it? Put it in the movie. I can, yeah. The other big internet debate is over what starts the time loop. What causes it? Do you have a theory about what causes the time loop? Because the
I don't
internet's pretty
know.
set on its answer.
Is it something to do with the storm?
They all think it's Ned Ryerson.
Oh.
So, Ned Ryerson theories abound from anything from he is the god to the devil to an angel or any other spiritual being that is punishing Phil. And the evidence for this are, so the first time we meet Ned, he approaches us. Phil doesn't know him. He brushes him off, and Ned says things like, you know, watch that first step, it's a doozy. He knowingly mocks him. And the two most significant interactions we have with Ned are at the start of the film, which kicks off the time loop, and the end of the film, which shortly afterwards the time loop ends. So the loop itself, coincidentally or not, begins and ends around an interaction with Ned. So whether the brushing off or then the buying of the life insurance.
I will say one of the most satisfying moments in the film is when punch. He clocks him.
Yeah, it's just like, Ned? It's so good. The other thing that they bring up is that it may not be Ned causing this, but it's possible that Ned does pass it along. And that Ned was actually originally stuck in the time loop and passed it on to Phil. The evidence for this is because Ned actually does something that Phil does later on in the film. He approaches somebody with knowledge about them. That person has no memory of them, almost as if Ned was already in his own time loop and had learned all about Phil and used that knowledge to pass it on to him. The whole Ned? Phil Connor's high school stuff, he does those same things to Nancy, he does those same things to other characters in the film later on that Ned does to him. So it could be a curse about bettering oneself that is passed from person to person. And it was passed from Ned to Phil, and then at the end of the film, Phil passes it to someone else, who I'd like to think is Larry the cameraman.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I like that.
They're the Ned triggers that the internet kind of talks about. So we went over that Murray didn't speak, all that sort of stuff. One of the things that sticks in my mind in this film, and probably another reason I do love it, is I think the most human moment or series of moments in this film, and that is Phil trying to save the life of the homeless.
That's rough. That whole
breaks
sequence
me every time.
Because
it's played to perfection by the homeless gentleman, the actor who plays the homeless gentleman, and I actually think Bill Murray is probably best acting in the film as well.
I would agree with you with that. I think that's his strongest moment, like that, and that was a moment where you believe he cares about this guy and can't believe that he is not going to be successful, because by that point in the film, his goal is to do the most good possible on this day, you know? So, and he's got this challenge here that, you know, this tragedy that he cannot prevent. Like, you know, everything else he can prevent, and he can't prevent this. It's out of his control, and he just has to accept it.
It's the most human of things I think everybody learns multiple times throughout their life. No matter how much knowledge, no matter how much power, no matter how much pre-planning you have, there are some things you cannot avoid and you cannot change. And that's what Phil learns in that moment. He learns that, unfortunately, that man's passing is inevitable. He could spend the years and years he has becoming the best surgeon, the best doctor, the best healer he can, and nothing's going to change the outcome. And I think it's kind of that brutally honest moment in that part of the film that I actually think pulls together a lot of other parts of the film. It's kind of that final linchpin in his development as a character. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because of all the moments that stick with me in the movie, it's not comedic, it's not whimsical, it's not time travel-y, it's just this really human moment. And I think maybe that's another reason I love this film. Because of its narrative conceit, it allows us to experience all these different things in a film that you wouldn't normally experience in one narrative. You get to see love, you get to see death, you get to see comedy, you get to see narcissism, you get to see the best of human beings, the worst of human beings, and it's all wrapped in this little time loop.
And it's interesting. One other thing I wanted to comment on from a technical perspective is look, time loop movies, you know, which have kind of become their own genre, because there's enough of them out there. Like we say, this is, you know, you could call it the original time loop movie. It's not. There were others that did it beforehand, but this one is the one that sticks in people's mind. This is what popularized it, if you like, and really also solidified it as a concept. But because of that, because we're in 1993, the editing of this film is nowhere near as tight as you would do for this kind of premise with a modern audience. And I was reflecting on this by looking at it going, it almost kind of hurts the film for a modern audience, but again, that's not the fault of the film. It's not Groundhog Day from 1993's job to think of an audience in 2024. Do you know what I mean? Like, their job was to satisfy an audience in 1993 who, look, honestly, I'm sure they were just like, are they even going to get it at all? Like, you know what I mean? So they do some clever editing once we get familiar with the premise at the midpoint. But I did actually struggle a little bit with the first 2 or 3 times he relives his day because of the pace of the edit, and obviously I get it. It was appropriate for the time. It was trying to familiarize an audience with the concept. It's not actually really a criticism. It's just to say, for a modern audience, for a present day audience, it just doesn't play as well as I'm sure it would have, back in 93.
I agree with you. Like, a modern audience has had years of film language and pop culture to be ready to understand the concept a lot faster. And modern day editing, actually, I agree with you, probably suits the plot of this film a lot better. You can fit a lot more on, you can convey more time passing, you can do all those sort of things with quicker, sharper, and neater cuts and editing in this film. But you saying that also reminded me of actually one of my criticisms for the plot of this film. Phil Connors accepts his fate and understands what's happening way too fast. He has to keep the movie moving, but within 3 loops, he knows what's happening, he knows it's going to happen for ages and he can't get out of it, and he's just started to manipulate it and play around with it. I think it would take me a minimum of about 25 in real life if that was happening to me. Because, again, they have to keep the movie moving. It can't be a 7-hour movie. They can't show all these loops and him adjusting. But yeah, I think it's a little too fast. And maybe a different style of editing would help us in that, because they could have shown us more of that kind of realization, more loops in a faster and more acceptable time frame to a modern audience.
Yeah, quite possibly. So, look, at the end of the day, I'm happy you picked this one. I think it was about time that I went back to the Groundhog Day well, and I really did walk away this time with an even greater appreciation for the screenplay. Which I will continue to say is just top notch and really well done. Well done, Danny Rubin. Well done, Harold Ramis. Look, I enjoyed the film, so thanks for your pick.
Yay! Thank you so much for watching it with me. Now, I picked a really cool movie. What are you going to pick?
Well, look, we had a little joke at the end of the previous podcast, where we sort of went, well, what if we just picked Groundhog Day again? It's all about time loops, right?
You're not man enough. Do it.
What if we just went back in time again and just did 2 casts on the same thing? And I went, or we could do something close to that and pick an awesome modern version of a time loop movie. We're going to watch Edge of Tomorrow.
Live, die, repeat.
So Tom Cruise, Emily Blunt, and this is, I think, going to be really fascinating because we're going to skip from 1993's version of a time loop movie to 2014's version of a time loop movie, with all the acclimatization time that an audience has had in between those 2 time periods. So, plus, I just love Edge of Tomorrow. I think it's a great film. So,
genuinely love it as well. And I think, without diving into next week's movie too much, the best reinterpretation of the concept of a time loop movie that we've seen in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I'm super excited for this. Great pick, Jim.
No problem. Why don't you take us out by telling our gentle listeners where they can locate our wonderful product?
So thank you very much for coming on this cinema journey with us this week. If you want to continue taking adventures with us, you can do so by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple iTunes under, you guessed it, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. If you want to kind of jump into any social media with us, we only have the one place, that is Instagram. You can find us at Jim_and_Ben. Please like, subscribe, comment. I've said it for the last few podcasts. Anyone who comments and likes both our YouTube video and one of our podcasts on any platform and brings that to my attention through our social media, I will work with you to pick a film that we will inflict upon Jim. That is your reward for interacting with us. So, again, thank you so much for listening to us this week, and I can't wait for our movie next week. Jim?
Live, die, repeat. Laters.